Hello. I like tricking you every now and again. I know I've already done that before in another video, but I like the idea that you have that split second where you're like, God damn it, my computer's frozen, my internet just cut out. I have to look at this ugly bastard frozen on my screen. I like that. The idea that I can manipulate your psychology just for a brief second. It brings me great joy. Welcome to my channel. How are you? How you doing? I'm going to do one of my ripping through my records segment today, and if I could speak, that would be fantastic. Hopefully I won't have any more problems spitting out three-letter words. It's snowing in my neck of the woods right now. In fact, it's snowing this very second. It doesn't snow much here where I live. I live in the Pacific Northwest. Many people think it snows a lot here, but it doesn't really. But the last few days it's snowed a good couple of inches and it just started snowing. So I feel like it's a snow day. I haven't been motivated to leave the house, and why would I? I don't really want to. When it does snow around here, people tend to lose their minds. They completely lose their shit. Those of you in the Northeast and Midwest, you would laugh at Pacific Northwesterners with how they deal with snow. It's hilarious. I mean, we'll get that much, the whole city panics. Everything shuts down. It's like COVID. People are completely hysterical. And that's mainly because the vast majority of people that live where I live are all Californians. You know, California's on fire. You know, California has the most absurd taxes and weather and droughts and fires. And so these Californians, they sell their $1 million monstrosity homes and then they flock up to my neighborhood and jack up the price of living. Thank you very much, Californians. I appreciate that. But it also happens to be the truth. But anyway, when Californians see snow, it's fucking hilarious. They lose their shit. They have no idea what to do. No clue. Total, utter panic in their eyes. I mean, they go to the local grocery store and they're like locusts. They just flood in and they buy every product they can, thinking that they're going to be snowed in for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, it's like an inch of snow, dude. It's an inch of snow. The roads are fine. People are getting around. Everything's open. Not to a Californian. To California, it's the apocalypse. We have an inch of snow. Holy shit. Go to the local Walmart and buy everything. Everything they have, buy it. Fucking sacks and wagonfuls of bottled water and toilet paper. I mean, these people are... Anyway, sorry. I'm not here to go off on the Californians as much as I would like to. I am here to rip through my records. And these types of videos, I tend to get a lot of new viewers because I do tend to talk about the same type of music on my channel. I'd say 75% of everything I talk about tends to fall into certain categories, but every once in a while I talk about albums like this. And I should talk more about records like this, albums like this, because this is an excellent album. I told you I can't talk today. I'm sorry. I'm watching the snow. I'm distracted right now. This is an excellent album, and I feel like a lot of albums that are, 20 plus years old, I do feel sometimes that history gets rewritten about certain records like this. Certain moments in musical history get rewritten, realized. People who weren't even alive when this album came out to start to be experts on what the whole climate was like when this album came out. So I'm going to give my perspective, the perspective of somebody who was actually there, who actually bought this very record in 1990 when this album came out, this very record. And also, this has been reissued in this past year. Like some point last year in 2024, I noticed that there's a reissue of this, or a couple of different reissues of this, different colored vinyl and stuff. So I'll get into that as well. And those of you who are new to my channel, very briefly, I'm a record guy, longtime DJ. I have thousands of records in my collection, roughly about 18,000. A lot of them are boxed up. A lot of them I keep them stored away and tucked away in my storage unit. And every once in a while, I'll peel open the tape on one of those old storage boxes and I'll look into the record box and I'll discover these lost gems that I forgot that I had. Really, snow's coming down hard right now. I love this. But sometimes I feel like I have my own record store. I have a lot of records, and sometimes I find a box hidden away in one of my two storage units. I have two storage units, each of them the size of a two-car garage. So I have a lot of shit. I have a lot of records. I have a lot of movies. I have a lot of video games. These are my passions. But we're talking about music today and records, and I have a lot of them. Every once in a while, I'll break open one of those boxes, and yeah, it's like I do feel like I'm in a long lost record store that's just been, filled with all of these lost gems that no one's ever touched. I forget what I have, I have a life, especially stuff like this that came out years ago, decades ago. Over the last 35 years, I can't even believe how much shit I've been through, the relationships, the places I've gone, different countries I've visited, relationships I've had, different cities I've lived in. It's been a long haul. I have a life filled with adventures. And so when I go to my storage unit and I crack open boxes of records filled with things like this, it's kind of exciting. And a record like this, it's even more exciting because this album has built up a lot of momentum over the last 35 years to the point where it just got reissued, like I just mentioned. And that makes me happy. I think albums like this should not be forgotten. They need to be re-examined and revisited. And that's what I'm here to do today. So I hope you like it. This is the Sunday's first album, Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic. And let me pull it out of its sleeve here. This is this particular copy I have is on Geffen Records. This is the U.S. press, and I'll get into the vinyl pressing itself in a few minutes. I think it's worth talking about at least for a minute or two. But this is the actual record. I'll show you the labels here. This is just pretty much a standard Geffen release. They started to change up their labels a little bit. They went from that big round G to the DGC label, as you can see. Geffen was one of the few labels in the United States that continued to press albums on vinyl. As most of you probably know, starting in 1990, really, American record labels just kind of stopped pressing albums on vinyl for a couple of years. And when I say albums, I mean LPs. They still pressed 12 inches because DJs needed to play those in clubs and mix with them. I was one of them. And so there's a myth that American record companies stopped making records in the 90s. That's not true. They always made them. They just really laid off on it, especially long players. 12 inches, yeah, American record companies never stopped making 12 inches. Those were always there. But yeah, the albums were harder to find, and I think it's one of the reasons why this particular pressing is really rare, and I would highly recommend it. Again, I'll get into that in a minute. This is a beautiful record. Getting back to what my ripping through my records segment is, when I go through all of my records and I find things I want to record, I am ripping them, basically recording them into my digital archive, my library, my digital library. I like to keep the record, but I like to record it with all of my equipment that I have. I have a certain turntable that I do my vinyl rips with. I have multiple turntables, but I have a turntable that I've set up exactly, precisely the way I want in terms of ripping vinyl. This record sounds fantastic. I love this record. When I listen to it, it just takes me back. Anybody that was alive in I was 17 years old, by the way. I know I'm dating myself, but whatever. It is what it is. I was 17 when this album came out. And I was a senior in high school. And when I hear this album, it just, my God, the warm fuzzies just take me over like a warm blanket. I was a little emotional listening to this album. I just recorded it this morning, actually, and hearing this album, it just takes me back to so many intense memories. You know, in my case, I was a total jock in high school, so I remember listening to this album before before I went and played football games and things like that. I would listen to this to get me pumped up, and I know most people would listen to Metallica or Def Leppard or something like most football players did. Trust me, I know this because I played with them. They would listen to that kind of music to pump them up, but not me. I'd listen to this, stuff like this. It really takes me back. It takes me back to my first girlfriend I ever had, laying on her bed, feeling her beautiful, massive tits as I listened to Joy from this album. I still have a very, very intense memory of that. Yeah, I know. I'm getting crude. I'm crude on this channel. Get used to it. Yeah, having my first feel up to the last track, Joy. Lots of memories. Lots of memories happen when I hear this album. But the number one memory I have of this, to be frank, is this. Here's Where the Story Ends. Now that's the big cut from this album. Everyone knows it. It's an absolute classic. It was one of the singles from the album. Another single was Joy. A beautiful song. If those of you who were around in 1990 buying records and listening to, they called it indie music back then, alternative music. Those of you who are into that kind of shit, you know this song. You couldn't get away from it. And this is part of what I want to clear up about some new commentary I see about this album. This idea that this album was overlooked and not appreciated in its day. Bullshit. Yes, it was. This album was heard by everybody. It was very popular. MTV played it all the time. They played Here's Where the Story Ends. You heard it on the radio. You couldn't get away from this. So I've seen some younger zillennials on YouTube talking about their opinions of this and how it was overlooked in its day. No, it wasn't. This album was very, very popular. Here in the United States, it was even more popular in the UK. These guys are British, by the way. They're from the UK. This was a very popular album in its day. So I want to dispel that right away. Like this album somehow was overlooked. No, it wasn't. Very popular album. Those of you who are alive too in 1990 buying this stuff, do you remember watching, did any of you watch MTV? Did you stay up every Sunday night at midnight like I did and watch 120 minutes? And week after week, Dave Kendall would announce the video for Here's Where the Story Ends. Do you remember this? I mean, in fact, there was a point where I was sick of hearing this. They played it so much. It's probably overplayed. I remember there was definitely a time where I didn't mind putting this record away, finally, and listening to something else. So, again, I wanted to correct the rewriting of history, because rewriting of history drives me nuts. I was there on day one when this album came out, and this was very deeply appreciated by many people. This wasn't some overlooked thing. People need to understand that. The big hit, obviously, was Here's Where the Story Ends, and Joy was another single from this album. It's funny, most albums, I think, in my opinion, the record companies will pick the most obvious hit so they can play it on the radio, and that usually, in my opinion, ends up being one of the worst songs on the album, if not the worst. This is one of those moments where the best song on the album is pretty much the big single, Here's Where the Story Ends. I mean, it's a beautiful song. It's just perfect. It's so good. It hasn't aged a fucking day. You can listen to it today and still get everything you got out of it 35 years ago, which is crazy to think that this album is that old, but it is. 35 years now. Here's Where the Story Ends. It's a perfect pop song. It really is. The guitars, the drums, Harriet Wheeler's vocals. Are you kidding me? This woman and her voice. Whew, man, what a great voice. She just ties the whole thing together. A really beautiful moment on a beautiful album. And there's not a bad song on this album, by the way. I remember When I bought this record, I'm pretty sure I bought it at Tower Records, like I bought most of my albums at that point. Um, I remember, a lot of times you'd hear the big song and then you'd go and buy the album and you would kind of grit your teeth and clench your asshole knowing that the rest of this would be filler. Like you're gonna get one good song and then the rest of it's gonna be shit. Not here, man. I remember listening to this being like, wow, this whole album is full of cuts, man. I mean, the whole album is great. Every song on here. Every song. It's 10 tracks of perfection. And in 1990, this was just pretty much indie pop music. We didn't have the term dream pop. This is another term that has reared its ugly head in recent years, dream pop. Shoegaze was a thing then. Like even back in 1990, we knew of shoegaze, but this wasn't really shoegaze. I still don't think it is. Now people love calling this dream pop, but whatever. It's pop music. That's how I think of it. Yeah, is it dreamy? I don't know. Okay, sure. Those of you who watch my channel regularly, you know that I have an extreme distaste for labels and genre tags and things like that. I'm not going to call this dream pop, okay? This is just really well executed pop music. All it is. And it's one of the best. Listening to this again in 2025, it's been fun to revisit this because it really is a classic. And it deserves to be reissued. I'm going to get into that now. I noticed that I'm pretty sure that Universal owns Geffen now, or at least they do the vinyl pressings. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong there. But I did notice that this got repressed last year. I want to say I saw a couple of different versions. Like maybe there was one on silver vinyl and then one on some other color. I don't know. If Universal did the reissue, I can pretty much guarantee that it is nowhere near as good as this. In fact, and this is where I'm going to get a little bit nerdy on you, so you can tune out now if you don't want to hear specifics of the actual vinyl press. But if you love this album and you want to hear the best possible version of it, I would recommend you get this David Geffen US 1990 vinyl release. This was released with direct metal mastering. And the American record companies were doing that a lot in the 80s and early 90s, and then they kind of laid off doing it. The UK didn't really do it. I have the UK press of this as well. This US Geffen release, the direct metal master, sounds amazing. It really does. It is the best version of this album I've ever heard in my life. Now, I haven't heard the reissues, but do I really need to? I highly, highly doubt the reissues sound all that good. If you're a big fan of this record, and you should be, and you want to hear it in its greatest form, its greatest mastering, it's this. It's the Geffen press from 1990. I know I'm getting super nerdy, but I do love this album, and as I was ripping it and recording it, I was like, God, this sounds good. This sounds so good. Records just don't sound like this anymore. Music doesn't sound like this anymore. I'm talking about sound quality, okay? This is a really excellent press, and this is just the standard US press. There's nothing special about it, but this is how they press shit back then. The Americans were pretty damn serious about the way they pressed records in the 80s. They did a really nice job. Excellent job with it. It's far from that now. It's the antithesis of that now. They do not do a good job now. But this is a great press. It sounds fantastic. Better than any digital version and better than the UK vinyl version. So if you love this record and you want to hear it on vinyl, forget about the fucking represses. Although I know finding this US Geffen press is probably not easy. But again, if you love this album, this is the way you want to hear it. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Yeah, this takes me back big time. So many memories. Watching MTV, getting ready for my football games, rolling around with my first girlfriend. It really, just talking about it, I get a little emotional. But as this album was playing, I was like, oh my God. Like sometimes you forget about things, but this is why I love music, or one of the reasons I love music is you can listen to it and it opens up all of these things and memories and life experiences that you almost forgot about. But then all of a sudden you hear a note, you hear a vocal cord, and it just opens up this entire labyrinth of emotions and memories. And that's what this record does for me. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. A really fantastic album. 35 years old this year and hasn't aged a single day. Go revisit this album. I have, and I do not regret it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Later.